So, explain to us how you got. So you went from music college. You discovered this thing of being able to plug a cello in. How did you get into the wonderful world of soundtracks, working with the likes of Foo Fighters all the way to Hans Zimmer, via Johnny Marr, and all of that? Because I mean, people will be very aware of your physical presence on say the Hans Zimmer tours, but you also appear on countless soundtracks. How did that manifest?
Oh boy. Okay, I'll try not to make this too long-winded, right? Because it's kind of like this. It's all over the place. I go to USC. I study classical cello, and it really actually was born out of a necessity to just make money to survive because it's very expensive in Los Angeles. I didn't have family support financially, so thankfully I did have the full scholarship for the tuition, but it didn't cover living expenses and food and books. You know, I remember the first semester, my textbooks were like $900, and that was such an astronomical, frightening amount of money to me. I mean, I couldn't pay it, you know, so I opened a credit card, and very much in myself, as much as, you know, music and expression and love, I think it was a very deep-seated need to be able to support myself and to make money and to be financially independent. And so I thought, like, okay, how can I make money? You know, how can I make money with the one thing that I feel like I'm pretty good at, right? Okay, so I put out ads on Craigslist every day, 3 times a day, using different wording because they would like flag me for like putting out too many ads. Say, oh, cellist available for hire. I played so many weddings, actually more funerals than weddings, sadly.
Cello.
Well, cello, yeah. A lot of bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs.
Okay.
I played an engagement once where I did think I might have like just put myself into a situation where I'd be murdered because the guy had me wait in his closet for about 30 minutes while his fiance came home, like with my cello. And I thought when I was waiting there, I'm like, oh my gosh, like no one knows I'm here. Like maybe he's going to come kill me. And so I've done all kinds of weird stuff with the cello. But my point is I would play any type of music, you know, whatever you want me to play. Do you play country? Sure. I had no idea how to play country music. And so I just kind of learned, you know, everything that I did. And I think unintentionally, it actually broadened my musical horizons because, again, I had no exposure to anything but classical music previously. So I did that. And then I also did start playing some classical concerts as a soloist, never with like A-level orchestras, but I did play with some great orchestras over in Europe. And so I would have to take time off from school to be able to go and perform. And it didn't pay a huge amount, but, you know, a couple $1,000s or something for per show. And I had to do it because if I didn't do it, I wouldn't be able to survive to actually go to school. And it got to the point where I was 2.5 years into my cello performance degree. The only classes I was doing well in were cello performance and then a few other music related courses. But because I was gone so often trying to, you know, to make money, I started getting really bad grades. And so they told me, you know, in order to keep your scholarship, you have to stay here and stop performing. So you can get your degree.
Oh, the irony.
Yeah, it was ironic. And so I left. I dropped out of school. And again, I loved like the musical, I think, experience at USC. It was very traditional at the time. Now they're you know, they have a pop music program and it's different. But at the time, it was strictly classical. And I loved my teacher there, Eleanor Schoenfeld, who, by the way, also taught my father. She discovered him in China. And
oh, wow.
So that was a whole other thing. And during that time, yes, I was experimenting with the electric cello. I started listening to a lot of actually Steve Vai and Yngwie Malmsteen, old school, right? Like the Shredders. Because I feel like Yngwie especially has this connection with classical music, you know, very classically based licks in the way that he plays. And so that I can understand. I'm like, oh, well, I can do that, you know? And I would just sit, in addition to my practice, I would sit with my computer because I had access now to YouTube and the internet and just like play along and try to figure out what was going on because also improvisation is not something that classical musicians do, right? And so I would practice it. Like these things you have to practice. It doesn't just magically, oh, maybe it magically happens for some geniuses, but I am not a genius. So, but maybe 2 hours a day, I would like just play along with like different guitar players and try to figure out what they're doing and what's a pentatonic scale, you know? And I don't even remember what you asked me. I told, how I got into soundtrack music.
Yeah.
So yeah, at the time, I was playing on some student composer sessions, right? But it really wasn't something that I was focused on doing. I wanted to play industrial metal, and I had like several bands that I was trying to put together. And so after I dropped out of school. I had been in Los Angeles for maybe 5 years at that time. So like 2.5 years out of school, which is a pretty long time. I was living in a garage in Sun Valley, which is like way up north. No heat, no air conditioning. I mean, it was like, but it was cheap. It was $550 a month, including utilities and stolen cable. And so yeah, I just practiced all day in there, and I did gigs here and there. I did play on my dear friend Austin Wintry's soundtrack for Journey. And at the time when we first started working on it, we had no idea it was going to be, this incredible thing that Austin did. It was just a small game from a small game company. We recorded it in his very first studio, very small studio. And we had both gone to USC. But other than that, everything else was like, little things here and there. And I was really struggling. Like with my band at the time, I just couldn't get anything off the ground. So I thought, okay, maybe my parents are right. Maybe I should be normal and audition for the San Diego Symphony, because there was an opening for a cellist in the cello section. And I thought, okay, before I do this and give up, and I don't mean give up like it's wonderful to play in an orchestra, but give up on my own crazy dreams that I had of being a electric cello player that shreds and performs on stage and tours with like metal bands. That's really what I wanted to do. I should just make a music video and put it up on this new thing called YouTube that I've been watching, right? Just for myself. So one day when I'm 80, I can show my grandkids, oh, look at grandma when she was, 23 years old. And so at the time I had like $3,000, a little over $3,000 to my name, which not including my debt. So I was actually negative a lot. But I had that in my bank account, and I thought, all right, if I'm just going to give up, right, I'm going to use this money, pull a lot of favors from friends, and make this music video. And I made a industrial metal version of Flight of the Bumblebee. I know it's so overdone. Hans always says, I hate that song. Discovered me, right? So it's because I thought, all right, what are people impressed by? Stuff that's in your face and obvious, and okay, I can play really fast. So I just did that. Artistically, it's a little extreme. You do have to sign into YouTube to say you're 18 and over to watch this video. To me, it's art, so
Okay.
It's not. Okay, I don't know if you've seen it, but
I haven't.
It's called Queen Bee. And actually, initially, my idea was to have 100 nude male extras covered in gold body paint as the bees. But then I discovered, that I couldn't afford that because I had $3,000.
Yeah, the body paint's very expensive these days.
So yeah, I made the video, and anyway, my goal, right, which was to have this metal band, maybe Rammstein or Metallica, or somebody will see it and save me and whisk me away on tour. That did not happen. But what did happen was that a lot of soundtrack composers happened to see the video. So I think 1 week after the video came out, I was contacted by John Debney, Brian Tyler, and Hans Zimmer.
Wow.
Yeah, all within a week. And with Hans, I'm always so grateful to my friend Anne-Marie, who I met doing another project, but she was working with Hans at the time. And he had asked her, oh, I'm looking for like a cellist, someone like, weird or unique or whatnot. And she showed him the video. So that's how he saw that video. But yeah, I mean, it was a huge gamble, and that wasn't my intention. So how I got into soundtrack music was completely by accident. But I think I'm actually, I think the way that I am lends itself well to soundtrack music, because there is no limitation of genre. Depending on what you're scoring, what you're doing, you can play everything from very beautiful spiritual music that's classically based to extreme, metal, electronic, whatever. And yeah, it's genre defying, and for myself, I have a hard time staying in one genre, and so I think it's wonderful. So it was a perfect situation that I ended up in by accident.
It's just such an amazing story. Great pleasure to welcome Ben. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing very well.
Excellent. Now, Ben is a fantastic composer, but also is someone who has, very much like me, diversified your operations into applications of music and sound that is possibly adjacent to the core ambitions a lot of people have. And that's not me trying to be polite. I think it's the thing that we've all got to do is be open-minded and discover areas where we have strengths and interests and all that kind of stuff. So you've been working not only as a composer, but in the field of podcasting, helping people get podcasts on, helping people with the technical concerns there. But also, you've been specialising in audio branding, which is something I'd love for you to explain to me, as well as the people who've joined us here today. So what was your route? Your accent suggests you're from south of the...
I've moved around a bit, yeah.
Yeah. So what was your way in?
Well, I was a singer-songwriter.
Right.
That's how I started out, and that was my kind of ambition. And like many people, that didn't quite work out, and my day job became my career.
Yeah.
And I got to 40 years old, and I looked around, and I realised used to be the youngest person in the team, and I realised I was the oldest person there.
That happens quite quickly, doesn't it? It's like a flip.
Yes, it's a flip thing, yeah. A lot of people left, and I just thought, if I don't leave now, I'm probably never will. And so I jumped ship, and it wasn't the way you're taught you should do it, where you kind of get your side hustle going and figure out, no, it was more like, I have to go now. And
right.
So I did. And then I jumped off a cliff and I built the parachute on the way down. So It was one of those, what am I good at? What can I do? What can I get paid for? What do people need? And the first thing that came was podcasts, because as a composer, I had all the equipment. I could figure most of it out.
Can I interrupt? Just what kind of year was this? Because obviously the podcast is a timeline that is exploding, but it was a few years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was 2018 when I made that jump, and I'd already done a couple of things for people, but it wasn't really in my mind as a career. And then what happened was I started doing more and more music for people, just in terms of playlisting and finding things that were going to fit their brand, and because I have a background in branding, had some awareness of that. And it was one particular client who she was a very specific sort of person, and I could not find it. And I'd spent so long looking through every library, listening to motivational corporate piano tunes and looking for the gems, And I thought it wasn't a complicated thing she needed. I could have done it by now. So I did.
Great.
And unbeknownst to me, she was going off to a branding weekend with all these kind of entrepreneurs and people who needed to build a personal brand. And she just played it to everyone and went, look what this guy did for me. And I did go over the top because I was enjoying myself.
Yeah.
And that's how it started, really. So it started with podcasts, but I quickly started to realize, well, it goes beyond that, because most of the people I work with, which is US-based entrepreneurs and business owners, they're kind of trying to tie all these things together. They're on Instagram, they're doing speeches, they're doing all sorts of things. And an audio brand is a great way to kind of pull it all together. So you have a theme, you have a motif, whatever it might be, but it might sound very different on the waiting room on the webinar than it does at the keynote speech, when you want a kind of club banger or something. So that's how I got started.
And I think that what you've demonstrated is a fantastic way of. I've always said I question the rationale behind trying to hold down a demanding day job whilst developing maybe that side hustle, whilst like planning to become a full-time composer, because you get tied into it. You build up. It always happens. It's only natural. You build up an overhead burden, whether it be paying off a lease on a car or renting or whatever. Whereas actually there are many, many, many jobs that are adjacent to the actual craft of composing, but that will get you into those creative spheres where opportunities can happen where they absolutely wouldn't happen in your day job working in a bank or whatever.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think I've had two professional lives, and one of them was, well, this thing over here pays for this thing over here, and that didn't work very well. So you've got to find that overlap.
Yeah. And who would have known that would have been your route in? The other thing that I really love about your story is the argument, and I'm sure it's an argument you make frequently, for commissioned music. That it's not as scary as you think. It's probably not as expensive as you think. And it's a little bit like, I need to find a shelving unit, and it's like, well, why don't you get a joiner in to actually put some shelves that fit into the cubby, as opposed to going to lots of different shops and measuring up, really,
Yeah, and I think the other thing that part of the job that I've realised, part of my job now is kind of education, and so I'm starting to come out from behind the desk more and talk about this stuff, because I think that was the challenge for me, was people would spend a lot of money on their website design and their logo and their fonts and fuss all over that, and then they'd ask for some music, and they'd probably ask someone who's been there for a week, can you go and find some music?
Yeah.
And they'd pick something they liked. And it was just, there's a mismatch,
Yeah.
And you can, as you know, you can tell a story. You can explain who you are. You can do so much in 10 seconds of music, far more than you can do by just explaining it.
Yes, absolutely.
And with all of these people I work with, the key thing is they're trying to form an emotional connection with their listener. And music is emotion, isn't it?
Yeah.
So,
And where library music is concerned, and this is no offence to library music composers, because I am one, but you were mentioning, looking out for the gems there. Once you've got quite a tight brief, it makes the search that much more difficult. But also, I don't know if you'd agree that when you do find the gems, they're pretty obvious. And as a consequence, quite often, other people have found those gems.
Right.
They stick out. They have that rare thing that touches the chord, which is why when you look at TikTok, or the whatever has been migrated from TikTok onto your Instagram feed, you'll hear maybe 5-6 pieces of music over and over again. And I know that memes are slightly different. But the danger always is, and I always quote that my mother was in a series called Give Us a Clue, which just happened to have exactly the same theme tune as Grange Hill, because it was the same piece of library music.
Bam, bam. Really?
Yeah, the first series of Give Us a Clue had the Grange Hill, because it was from like the Bruton catalogue. And again, these things, they stick out. And in this day and age, where we're still making library music in albums, what tends to happen is the album's now like 6 tracks long, because people know you never go past the second or third song on an album.
Yeah.
So what happens is all of these kind of signature tracks that fit to the brief that fits the title of the album, more than not, people will listen, that's a very well described album, or that nails it. And so it's not like you've got, a 1 in 6 chance of that being heard on another podcast that's a similar thing. It's a much higher set of odds. I don't know if that's something that you say to clients. There's always the risk.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly do. And really, what the main pitch is that if you're trying to build a personal brand, which a lot of these clients are trying to build a personal brand around the business,
Yeah.
You don't want to be using something and then walking through the supermarket and you hear it, on some advert, and you have no control over what it's on.
Yeah.
So immediately you ceded control. It's a little bit of the sort of Bruce Springsteen, Ronald Reagan moment kind of thing.
Yeah.
You don't know where it's going to be used. So to have control of that, and also to have something that actually represents who you are, or the side of you that you're presenting.
Yeah.
That's mostly, I mean, when it comes to podcasts, for example, a lot of people just look for a piece of music that they like. And what I'm normally looking for is, on a much more kind of personal level, who is it that you're talking to on your show? Do you understand who they are? How old are they? Where do they live? What do they do? What are they afraid of? What do they want? And most importantly, for the sector I work in, how will they feel when they achieve the thing you're trying to help them achieve? What does that sound like?
Yes.
What's that emotion? And that's what people tend to miss. And that's what you're trying to dial in.
Yeah.
And that's quite hard to do at the best of times. But a lot of the time, there are some better libraries out there, and there's some amazing music out there.
Yeah.
But it's like you said, when you get that specific, it's very, very hard to find something.
Yeah.
It gets harder and harder, in fact. And then that's when it makes sense to actually make it.
Yeah. A piece of music I wrote that this is my proudest moment as a library music composer. And apologies to those who have heard this story before, but yeah, one of my proudest moments as a library music composer was watching an episode of The Osbournes, and they'd selected a very light, bouncy piece of almost cocktail jazzy music that I'd written for a library. To underscore their cat being raped by their Yorkshire Terrier dog.
And was that music your music?
And that music was my music.
Oh,
and
beautiful.
It was just nice to know that the Prince of Darkness has probably heard one of my tracks whilst watching his cat being violated by his Yorkshire Terrier.
So they didn't go with the...
No, they didn't do that. It was much lighter. But, you can imagine, you put that on a podcast about, I don't know, an emotional awareness podcast, and suddenly someone goes, why have you used the cat rape music? Yeah. So there's always that danger. But it was, talking to Hans Zimmer once, name drop, he's very sensitive about percussion sample libraries and doesn't like, one, sharing his samples, and two, using commercial libraries. He said there's something so incredibly recognizable. I guess because percussion libraries, it's all about that first transient. So they're instantly recognizable. And he goes, he calls it the multiplex factor. He goes, I don't want someone coming in, seeing a score that has my kind of brand name on it, and then they go next door and see Spy Kids 9, and it's got exactly the same sample set on it. There's something slightly cheap about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
All of Snakes of Russia. How you doing, mate? Lovely to see you. Can we start with the big AI question? What are your thoughts? And
if AI could help me figure out these headphones.
Yeah, exactly. We could be useful for that. There we go. That's what it is. There you
Awesome.
go. Pal. Cheers. Awesome. How you doing, by the way?
I'm great, man. I'm great. Good
Excellent.
To see you.
Have you come far?
No. I was just a couple minutes away this morning, so not very far at all. Yeah.
Great stuff. AI. What do you think?
It's such a heavy topic. Like I just kind of caught your whole conversation about it, and it is such a crazy topic, especially in art. But I saw this great meme where it was or a quote or a tweet or something, and it was like I want AI to do my taxes and to wash my dishes so that I can spend more time making art.
Yeah.
And that's just like that was the most poignant thing I've ever heard about AI. It's such an interesting thing because it's so bonkers to me that soon we're going to have to start putting stickers on stuff that say made by humans, I think that's kind of lame. And I try to be open to most tools, that could help us as artists and musicians and whatever we do make our jobs a little bit easier. But the creative part's the fun part to me. Like I don't want to automate that.
No.
I don't use, like, I had some friends talk about Chat GPT, and one of my friends was organizing like a camping trip, and he's like, I had Chat GPT organize all of the campsites in Southern California, blah blah blah, like this. And then he's like, you got to try it. And I've been resistant up until like I haven't. And I went home, and like I think like for this tour that was coming up, I like asked Chat GPT to like do some stuff for me about hotels, right? And it just failed me. I had an easier time Googling the things I need. I don't know. And that was just my experience with Chat GPT. And I'm sure there's a use case that's probably really handy. But as far as I'm concerned, like in my world and for what I do, if there's a way that I could use AI for purely administrative stuff, like, hey, like a great example would be like, I have all these random sample libraries. If you could organize them in this format, like that's the kind of work that that I don't get really excited about AI, but that's the thing that would be exciting to me. Like very remedial work like that would be great. Or like if you have to just like, I don't know, maybe if I think about how it could relate to the world that we're in, like having like snipping samples or something like that be automated. You know, something like that. But I think that's more of like an automation thing, and that's been around for a while, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I know there's some DAWs that do that already and do a great job. So
I get AI to remove backgrounds. You know,
Yeah.
like it's like that. That's handy.
Yes, yes.
I think there's a similarity. I got taken around the studio. They did it in Camden. I got taken around the animation studio when they were doing Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
oh wow,
Which is that live action,
yeah, like back in the day.
yeah, and they just took me through the Disney process. And what was extraordinary, so this would have been like maybe early 90s, late 80s, is they said that they'd revolutionized the process, because what happens is the animators would draw the stuff on paper,
Okay.
and it's just outlines, and then they would transfer it to these clear cells, which is when the paint gets applied and stuff. And there used to be someone who used to transfer, like literally trace, you know, get the transparent cell and trace the paper sketch or the outline. And basically Xerox had developed a technology that could copy from paper onto these plastic cells, and they'd only invented it like a couple of years earlier. And they said, and this is like increasing our productivity by like speeding up by 2 weeks. And it's like, yeah, you don't want a trained artist tracing.
Right. Yeah.
And my case with ChatGPT is I got it to like find me all of dimensions of microphones, and it was when it said that an RE20 is 4 inches long, I was like, if that is 4 inches, we're all in trouble. So it just based it on consensus that a website believed that an RE20 was 4. But then what I did with this list is it was just, there's bits cut and pasted that I'd curated and put in, and all the fonts were different sizes, and I just went, tidy that up so it looked good, and boom.
Okay.
And so, as you say, it's kind of clerical.
Yeah, clerical. That's a
There
great
we go.
word. Yeah, administrative, clerical. You know, like just something to do my taxes. That's, you know, that's kind of. But I want it as far away from, you know, the art I make. But I've not to say I haven't experimented with certain things, right? I think when Midjourney came out, we were all like, "Wow, this is insane," right? And we all, you know, threw some prompts at it, and you know, and it's interesting. It's an interesting world, and then the video aspect of it. But like you, I'm not that threatened, because I mean, it's almost like just outrun the algorithm. Not the algorithm is the wrong word, but because it's constantly scraping stuff that we make, right? So just outrun it, right? And just try to push forward and make stuff, like make new shit, right? Make stuff that is one step ahead, or at least try to, you know,
or anti-algorithmic.
Right, yeah, and that's super ambitious. I realize that, but at the same time, it's like, I don't know, what else are we here for? Like, we're artists, let's evolve, right?
Yeah,
you know, unless you're AC/DC and then make the same record over and over again, and that's okay. But you know what I mean? You know,
it's a great record, though.
Yeah, and they could just make it 25 times, and it's fine with me. Yeah, you know. So.
We touched on something else, because something that really struck me when I discovered you, it was via Instagram, and it was through your imagery. But something that really struck me about your music is that I would classify it. It's not necessarily dance music, but it's electronic music. It could fall into that kind of horrible EDM kind of umbrella. But it felt to me to be very original and stuff. Do you share my opinions about the lack of evolution in EDM over the last kind of 20 years?
I mean, I think EDM, I mean, to use that term, I think it's very small, right? Because it's like within EDM, no, I don't think there's much innovation. Within electronic music as a medium, creating music with synthesizers and samples and technology, let's just call it technology. Sure, I think there's a great deal of forward movement. Unfortunately, a lot of it we don't hear about. You know, we don't see, because the people are making some amazing stuff, but like, no, there's so much stuff being made in the world of music that no one unfortunately is ever going to hear it. So, you know, I think in the world of like popular electronic music, it doesn't seem like there is, but I think deep down, I mean, you know, like let's look at all the Arcas or Sophies or you know, like they're making incredible music, and even some composers, like Ben Frost, Tim Hecker, like they're moving forward in ways that I think people have to catch up to. So yes and no, but I think EDM is a blanket term. It's just like I think of I like it is what you said. It's electronic music. You wouldn't call it dance music per se. I mean, maybe it's head nodding music or something like that. But I think there's a reason why most of the shows I play are like metal shows versus EDM festivals, because I think I would bore people to death, because they want what you're talking about. They're talking about they want this very formulaic kind of thing, and most of them, maybe I can't generalize all of them, but yes, it's a different thing. They want formula. They want the AC/DC record. They don't want it to change. They want their EDM to be the same. And
maybe they need to change the drugs.
Maybe, yeah, exactly.
It seems to be suited to a particular.
Well, yeah. I mean, think about that. Like Manchester in the '90s. Like what just came on? I was taking a road trip this weekend, and no, was it in a movie or something, or was it maybe it was one of the new Black Mirror episodes no, I remember what it was. There's a new documentary out called it's just simply called Bank Heist, The Heist, or something like that, and it's about and Guy Ritchie produced it, and the music was all 1990s Manchester acid music, and it was fantastic. I'm like, this music, it was the best soundtrack like for any documentary I've heard recently, and it was just all needle drop 1990s Manchester stuff. And then during that road trip, I had some Soup Dragons came on, and then it just put me down, and then EMF, and it just like, because that was my jam, because it was like basically in the 90s, it was like any band that had a guy with a sampler, I would just buy the record or the CD, because I was just so interested in like the sampler as an instrument, like that's my roots, kind of like getting an EPS, and then just hip hop, and then industrial, but then any band that could be the worst band ever, but there was a guy with a sampler, and I would be in, So all the Manchester stuff was great with all the breaks and stuff, so Black Grape and whatever.
Well, maybe that's where I personally have been spoiled by, I can remember where I was the first time I heard electro, the first time I heard, Sugar Hill Gang, first time I heard Rocket by Herbie Hancock,
yes.
First time I heard the artist we're not allowed to talk about anymore. What's his name? Africa Bambaataa.
Oh, right.
And then I remember where I was on Carnaby Street the first time I heard that Happy Mondays tune, with the big breakbeat, the remix by the guy he signed, I forget his name. But I guess to experience paradigm shifts, that I think has heightened my expectation of what happens with music, and you get these big shifts that move forward, whether it be kind of jazz or rock and roll and stuff, and they don't necessarily happen every generation, and I just feel that there's been a degree of atrophy, and I've always felt uncomfortable about the obsession about being in the box, and it kind of guiding the type of music that you play, and particularly where like orchestral samples are concerned, there has been a huge homogeny, because there's definitely stuff that you can do with sampled orchestral stuff that sounds good and real, and there's stuff that's more difficult. So people tend to go down that, okay, time for another ostinate.
Right. Yeah, it's true. If it's kind of like, using in the box is more of a metaphor than in the computer, right? Like sometimes, it's like orchestral samples can only do these things, and we can't pitch bend them more than they're naturally allowed to do. Like I just want to break that.
But that's the thing that I get from getting to know you is there's actually a mischief there. It's like, no, I want to see what happens if I stick this into this.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just like, I don't know. It's I mean, those tools have been used. Like I can't make an orchestral mock-up. I'm so impressed by people that can. It's just so interesting to me how that's an art form in and of itself to me. Making an orchestral mock-up from sample libraries, and I just maybe if I took a week and just did nothing, I just tried to so to me, I'm just like, well, how can I use these in my way? How can I take this patch, this cello patch, and pitch it in a way and bend it in a way that it doesn't sound like a cello anymore, but having access to really quality, like source material is obviously, helps, right? Rather than just, not good stuff,
Yeah. You want all the bandwidth there.
I do. I do. But also, like, it's crazy when you take even the most pristine recorded string samples and then just murder them. You can, like, it's with compression and stuff, you can hear, like, you literally hear the bow coming off and then you hear everyone moving, all the sound you're not supposed to make. But I love that stuff. It adds so much character. It adds the little extra note at the end of whatever hit. You just cranking that and smashing it in a really ugly way. You get all these, they're not artifacts, they're just like what was there, but we can't hear it because it was never meant to be played that loud or that that aggressive. And that's the stuff I like, the imperfections.
That thing when you really compress something madly. And it reminds me of that sequence in the first Blade Runner film with the photo when he goes in.
Yeah.
And it's like, I never ever heard that stuff there, that person like farting or whatever.
Yeah.
Tell us, we've worked together just very recently on the Tina Guo project. Be lovely to hear how you got to meet Tina and work on that, but also the work that you do in Hollywood and how you found your way into that. I think would be fascinating for everyone who's here and who's watching. But let's start with Tina.
Yeah, Tina, I met her, trying to think of what year it would have been. It would have been 10, 11 years ago. We were doing Batman vs. Superman. And Hans brought her in for a session, which ended up being, the Wonder Woman theme. And her and I just kind of hit it off. And so we kind of met there. And then I joined Hans and Tina on tour for 2017, 2018. And so we were just, touring the whole world together and playing shows every other night. And so I got to kind of know her a little bit better. And we decided like, oh, we'd be a good fit for like, I'll produce some of your stuff. And so her and I did an album called Game On, which was self-indulgent, but it was a bunch of video game covers essentially with Tina's electric and acoustic cello. And then I did another Sony album with her. And we've just kind of been in touch ever since. And I think it was the second tour we did together. We were talking about doing a sample library, and we had no idea for what it should be, but like we were just like, oh, what if it's like, I don't know, like loops, or maybe it's 16th notes or triplets and stuff like that. We came up with all these ideas, even recorded some, and then totally abandoned it. And then like four years went by. And I remember I was working on Dune, the Dune 2, and I had her do some stuff on it. And I immediately went like, oh man, this is so cool. Like, I wish there was like a sample library that had these types of sounds. And so I went to her, I'm like, hey, remember we talked about this? Like, what do you think about, what do we team up and like build something? And like, let's just get in the studio for a few days and just come up with countless ideas. And that's kind of what we did. And she probably hates me because I could not stop coming up with ideas. And of course she is the one sitting there after having to record all of them. But yeah, so that's kind of the Tina arc.
Well, I'm sure I speak for everyone that really appreciative of you guys offering that up to the world. And there is some extraordinary sound design on it. Are there any little kind of insights into how you approached that, and little boxes of tricks that you feel free to share with us?
Yeah, I mean, the electric cello, by definition, sorry, Tina, is kind of a horrendous sound. Like, just out of the box, it's like nasally, and look, I love her, but it's a horrible sounding instrument, and it takes an enormous amount of work you can get it to sound incredibly good and incredibly unique, but it does take a lot of know-how and a lot of problem solving, let's say, for better lack of term. And back on what we did on Batman vs Superman, one of the biggest things we learned was you have to triple track it. You have to triple track it. It has to be 3 separate recordings. You can use separate effects, but like when you combine them into one thing, it becomes a bit more of an instrument that feels less nasally. It has a bit more power to it. You can add a bit of like distortion or saturation just to like give it some clarity and warmth and power. But to the effects stuff that, you know, the 9 or however many effects layers that we did, that was something that actually I stole from Hans, where he did it on Dune, where we recorded samples and he had all of these faders that had basically 100% wet, whether it be reverbs, distortion, like all these things that you could, you know, add to the sound. And I'm like, that's a really cool idea, because now you have the sound of the electric cello and you can feather in a little sub bass, you can feather in a little reverb and delay and distortion and whatever other crazy nonsense I kind of threw in there. And you can create your whole soundscape through this one instrument, essentially.
No, and what I love about that is the performative nature of it. I mean, that for me is the magic of sampling. I mean, obviously we all use virtual instruments and stuff, but what I love about it is the ability to do stuff that you wouldn't be able to do in nature. That's what makes it fun. You know, the slowing down, et cetera, et cetera. Now, you've mentioned Hans a couple of times, and you do a lot of work with him. I mean, I don't know what the figure is, but I've always said that about 10% of composers I meet are obsessed with sound as much as they are writing notes and stuff. And I don't know if I've ever met anyone as obsessed with sound as Hans, and I would say that to his face. He has quite a moving passion for it, how the sound can create emotion. It would be lovely to hear how you came about meeting, working with Hans, and where you feel you connect with him. I'll make sure that this is my last question, and then if anyone wants to ask Steve a question, if they hold their hands up digitally, that would be great. But Steve, if you have to go, just go, I got a dash at any point.
Totally fine. Totally
okay.
Fine.
Yes.
So I moved out to Los Angeles like literally right after high school. You know, I wanted to be a film composer, and so I just found like a day job as like a receptionist / file clerk. Worked for about 6 years, just trying to do music on the side, you know, like at night when I could spare it. And, you know, I kind of got in with this company in London, actually, called Silver Screen Productions. And what they do is they basically cover film music by trying to reproduce it. But since it's not the original master, they can then license and sell compilation albums and, you know, do whatever stuff. So they found me. I happen to be not so bad at mock-ups, and they're like, hey, would you want to produce some of these mock-ups for us? And so they'd be like, hey, can you do whatever, Transformers? They'd give me an MP3 and I'd have to basically by ear recreate it and get as close to it as possible. So I did that for a couple of years and decided I'm originally from Ohio, in the Midwest. And so I'm like, you know what? LA is expensive. I'm going to move back. Like, I'm making better money now with the Silver Screen stuff. I can barely afford to live in Los Angeles as it is. So let's get out of here. And then literally 2 weeks before I left, I get a random email with the subject line of Hans Zimmer. And all it said was, hi, Steve, Hans would like to speak with you when you have a moment. Now, mind you, I've never reached out to Hans at all. I've never reached out to anybody he works with. This was completely out of the blue. So I immediately assumed he was suing me. And so I phoned him and he's like, hey, I heard this thing you did for Silver Screen of one of my tracks. He's like, it's really good. Are you in town? And I'm like, technically, yeah. So he's like, well, why don't we stop by the studio? So I stopped by the studio, and basically he was kind of like, look, this was back when Lorne was kind of doing what I'm doing now. You know, he was like Hans's right hand. And, you know, he's like, look, do you want to work here? Do you want to work with us? And, you know, I wasn't going to say no. So I canceled my flight and, you know, started that. And that was 14 plus years ago, I think now. So it's been a long time, but yeah. And so I've kind of been with him ever since and just been writing on stuff and producing stuff. And yeah. It's
such a great story, Steve. Oh, there's two things I just want to pick up there before I hand over. But what really resonates with me is I learn everything I know about music really by doing cover versions. And I guess I learned how to compose similar to how drummers learn how to drum. By and large, drummers drum along with tracks, and you know, doing. I guess what you must have done is learned so much about the tricks of the trade, but also working under pressure with Silver Screen.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it was really interesting because the track that Hans heard was 160 BPM from Angels and Demons, and it would have been about 6 years later. I was putting together the show, like the live show for him, and the track that we were using was 160 BPM. So I finally got like an actual look at all the MIDI data and all the audio and everything that was in the original version of that. And it was incredibly eye-opening because I wasn't necessarily wrong in any of the things that I was doing, but the amount of detail and intricacy that you don't necessarily hear in some of those tracks completely missed, which was really, really eye-opening. But yeah, it's the time pressure. I mean, I've always also been a fast composer. I mean, it's how you survive in this industry. So that time pressure, it is difficult to work under that pressure. And in some cases, especially when you're writing original music, because you know this, where you just kind of have to be inspired, you know, whether or not you're not, you got to figure it out and produce something. And, you know, that time to learn.
Brilliant stuff, Steve.